I came back from the hospital and found my son's wife packing my things into boxes. She smiled and said, "You're moving to a nursing home. We need this space." I stayed calm, made one phone call, and the next morning she was screaming, "Why are the locks changed and our accounts frozen?" Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. I walked through my front door and stopped. The air was wrong. It smelled of cardboard and a sharp floral perfume that was not mine. My cane tapped on the hardwood floor of the foyer, a sound usually absorbed by the rug that was no longer there. The space echoed. My eyes took in the scene before my mind could assemble it into meaning. 3 cardboard boxes sat in the middle of the living room. They were open. Inside, I saw the cream-colored linen of my table runners. I saw the spines of my photo albums, the ones documenting David's childhood. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. I had just returned from a routine checkup at the hospital. My blood pressure was good. My bones were holding. I had felt hopeful. Then Chloe walked out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a pair of my yellow rubber gloves. She smiled. It was a thin, efficient gesture. "Oh, you're back early," she said. "Chloe," I said. My voice was calm. It was always calm. "What is this?" "We're just getting a head start," she said. She pulled off the gloves and dropped them on the hall table, atop a stack of my books. "It'll make the transition easier for everyone." David appeared in the doorway behind her. He did not meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, at the boxes, at anything but me. His shoulders were hunched. That posture was familiar. It was the shape of his childhood apologies, the ones he gave after breaking a window or tracking mud across the clean floor. This was different. "Transition to where?" I asked. I kept my grip firm on the handle of my cane. The polished wood was smooth and solid. Chloe let out a small sigh, as if I were being deliberately slow. "To Cedar Ridge, Ellie. We found a lovely assisted living facility. They have a waiting list, but we secured a spot. It's for the best." The words landed with physical weight. Cedar Ridge. I knew it. A 2-story brick building on the other side of town, surrounded by a parking lot. I visited a friend there once. The hallways smelled of disinfectant and boiled vegetables. "My home is here," I said. The statement was simple, factual. "Ellie, be realistic," Chloe said. Her tone shifted, adopting a nurse's gentle firmness. "It was an act. This house is too much for you, the stairs, the garden, the upkeep. David and I worry we can't be here every day. At Cedar Ridge, you'll have help. You'll have people your own age, activities." I looked at David. "You think this is realistic?" He shifted his weight. "Mom, we want what's safest." "That is not an answer," I said. I took a step further into my own living room. The afternoon sun slanted through the bay window, illuminating dust motes in the air. It fell across the boxes, making the cardboard look cheap and temporary. I saw a corner of my wedding china peeking out from some bubble wrap. Robert's and my wedding china. "This is my house," I said, each word deliberate. Chloe's smile tightened. "Of course it is, and we'll handle everything. We'll sell it, and the proceeds can go toward your care. It's a practical solution." Sell it. The finality of it stole my breath for a second. They were not packing my things for storage. They were packing them for removal. They were packing me for removal. I felt a cold clarity wash over the initial shock. This was not a discussion. It was a presentation of facts. My facts, rearranged by them. I looked at the boxes again. They had not started with the attic or the garage. They had started with the living room, the heart of the home. They were packing the evidence of my life first. The photographs, the linens, the good dishes used for holidays. They were erasing the surface, preparing the house to be someone else's. "I had a hospital appointment," I said, my voice distant to my own ears. "You knew when I would return." "We thought it would be less stressful if you didn't have to watch," David mumbled. "You thought wrong." I turned from them. The urge to scream, to overturn the boxes, was a white-hot pressure in my chest. I did not let it out. I had not raised my voice in this house since Robert's funeral. I would not start now for them. I am going to my room. "Ellie, we need to talk about the timeline," Chloe called after me. I did not answer. I walked down the hallway past the doorframe with the faded pencil marks charting David's growth. My bedroom door was closed. I opened it, stepped inside, and closed it behind me. The click of the latch was a small, definitive sound. The room was undisturbed. My bed was made. The book I was reading lay on the nightstand. The photograph of Robert on our 40th anniversary sat in its silver frame. This they had not touched yet. Perhaps they thought the bedroom would be last, or perhaps they considered its contents unimportant. I sat on the edge of the bed. My hands rested in my lap. They were steady. I listened. I heard the low murmur of their voices in the living room. Chloe's was insistent. David's was a defeated rumble. I could not make out the words, and I did not need to. The planning was done. The execution had begun. The humiliation was a slow burn. They had waited for me to leave. They had handled my possessions with their bare hands, deciding what was worth keeping and what was not. They had discussed my future, my frailty, my obsolescence in this very house. They had looked at my life and seen a problem to be solved, an asset to be liquidated. I thought of the hospital that morning. The nurse had called me spry. The doctor had said my mind was sharp as ever. I had walked out feeling seen as a person. I walked back into my home and became a liability. I stood up. The anger was there, but it was a quiet, focused thing. It had no heat. It had density. I walked to my closet. It was a walk-in, lined with cedar. My clothes hung neatly. At the very back, behind a row of winter coats I no longer wore, was a small, fireproof lockbox. It was gunmetal gray and heavy. I had to use both hands to lift it. I carried it to the bed and set it down. I knew the combination. It was the date Robert and I bought this house. I turned the dial. The lock released with a soft thunk. I lifted the lid. Inside were documents. Neat, legal, organized. Robert had been a meticulous man, a planner. He had seen the shape of things to come. "The world is unkind to old women who own things, Ellie," he had told me once, years ago. "We will not leave you exposed." I had not thought I would need these papers against my own son. I had imagined faceless institutions, distant relatives. Not this. Not the boy whose height was marked on the doorframe, standing silent in my foyer while his wife packed my life away. I lifted out the top folder. The paper was crisp. I did not open it. I did not need to. I knew what it said. The house was not just a house. It was a trust. The money was not just money. It was a wall. I placed the folder on the bed beside me. I looked at the photograph of Robert. His eyes seemed to hold a knowing patience. He had waited for me to catch up. The voices in the living room grew louder. A disagreement. I heard Chloe say, "She has to see reason, David." I heard his indistinct reply. I closed the lockbox. I returned it to the back of the closet. I took the single folder and slid it beneath my mattress, a temporary hiding place. Then I sat back down on the bed. I would have a cup of tea. I would make it in my kitchen, with my kettle, and I would drink it from my favorite mug. I would do this today, and I would do it tomorrow. I would water my roses in the morning. I would move through my home as if the boxes were not there. They had shown me their plan. Now I would show them my composure. It would be my first reply. The decision was made. It had been made the moment I saw my photo albums in that box. The grief for my son's complicity was a separate thing, a raw ache in my throat. I would feel it later. Now, there was only the next step, the first call. But not yet. First the tea. First the ordinary action. Let them think I was defeated. Let them think I was resigned. It would make the reversal so much more instructive. I stood up, smoothed the front of my dress, and opened my bedroom door. The hallway stretched before me. At its end, I could see the corner of a cardboard box. I walked toward it. I walked past it. I went into my kitchen to put the kettle on. The kettle whistled, a sharp, familiar sound in the silence. I poured the boiling water over the tea bag in my favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle David made in elementary school. The steam rose, warming my face. I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at my garden. The evening light was soft on the rose bushes. I counted the buds. Everything was in its place out there. I heard them before I saw them. David and Chloe were in the living room, their voices a low, tense hum. I took my tea and walked past the doorway. They stopped talking. Chloe was stacking books into another box. David was holding a framed picture, one of him as a boy with his father. "Mom," David said. He put the picture down. "Can we talk?" "There is nothing to discuss," I said. I did not stop walking. "I am having my tea." "Ellie, this stubbornness isn't helpful," Chloe said. She did not look up from the box. "We're trying to do the responsible thing." I turned at the foot of the stairs. "You are packing my belongings without my consent. That is not responsibility. That is theft." My voice was level. I saw David flinch. "It's not theft. It's—" Chloe began. "It is," I interrupted. I held her gaze until she looked away, back to the books. I continued up the stairs. My leg ached from the hospital, from the standing, from the shock. I focused on each step. The tea did not slosh in the cup. In my room, I closed the door. I set the mug on the nightstand. I listened. Their murmuring started again, quicker now. Arguing. Good. Let them argue. Let them feel the first cracks in their certainty. I sat on the bed and reached beneath the mattress. The manila folder was cool and smooth. I opened it on my lap. The top document was the deed, not to the house, but to the land trust that held the title. Robert's name was next to mine. Below it, the words, "Irrevocable Family Trust." I knew the terms. The house was an asset of the trust. I was the sole lifetime beneficiary. I had the right to occupy the property for as long as I lived. The trust also controlled the disbursement of Robert's life insurance and investments. David was a successor beneficiary, but distributions for his benefit required the consent of the trustee. The trustee was not David. It was Marcus Thorne. Robert had explained it all to me, years ago, at this very kitchen table. "Marcus is our firewall, Ellie," he had said. "He's a brother to me. He'll see the paperwork is followed, not the sentiment." I had nodded, understanding the legal necessity but never imagining the personal one. The second document was a durable power of attorney I had granted to Marcus, concurrent with one I had granted to David. It had seemed a balanced, prudent thing to do. Now it was a trap that had already sprung. David had clearly used his authority, or allowed Chloe to use it, to begin the process with Cedar Ridge. My signature was on file there now, probably forged or obtained under coercion. That would need to be addressed. The third document was a single sheet, a personal letter from Robert, not legally binding but more important than any contract. In his precise handwriting, it read, "For Eleanor. If you are reading this because David or anyone else is pressuring you about the house or the money, remember, you are the master of the trust, not its prisoner. Call Marcus. Do not hesitate. Do not be gentle. I love you." I touched the edge of the paper. I had not looked at this letter in over a decade. The grief was a sudden, hollow pang, but it was quickly filled by a surge of resolve. He had seen this potential shadow. He had built the walls for me. Now I had to defend the gate. I heard footsteps on the stairs, a knock on my door. "Mom?" It was David. "Come in." He opened the door, but didn't fully enter. He stood on the threshold, a man in his 40s looking like a scolded child. She's just worried about you." "I am not concerned with her worries," I said. I closed the folder but kept it on my lap. "I am concerned with your actions." "I'm trying to do what's best." "You are following instructions," I corrected him. "There is a difference. Did you sign papers for Cedar Ridge?" He looked at the floor. They needed a financial guarantor. I'm your power of attorney. It was just a formality. A formality that commits me to a facility and commits my assets to pay for it. Did you read the contract? It's a good place, Mom. They have a swimming pool. I do not swim. I stared at him until he finally met my eyes. You gave them my social security number, my Medicare information. You spoke about me as if I were not present. You started packing my life into boxes. These are not the actions of a son. They are the actions of an administrator. His face crumpled. That's not fair. What is not fair, I said, my voice dropping, is that you did not ask me. You told me. Your wife told me. In my own home. That is the only fact that matters now. I just want you to be safe. The words burst out of him, plaintive and tired. I am safe. I am here. You are making me unsafe. I said it without heat. It was simply true. You may go now. I am tired from my appointment. He hesitated, wanting to say more, to fix it with more words. But there were no words for this. He nodded once and pulled the door closed. I waited until I heard his footsteps descend the stairs. Then I placed the folder on the nightstand. I picked up my tea. It was still warm. I drank it slowly, looking at Robert's picture. The plan was no longer an abstract notion. It was a sequence of steps. The first step was to demonstrate normalcy, to show no fear. I had done that. The second step was to secure my position. That required the call. But not tonight. Tonight, I would sleep in my bed. I would listen to the sounds of my house. I would let them think the battle was already over, the surrender negotiated. I finished my tea. I got up and prepared for bed, my routines unchanged. I washed my face, I brushed my hair, I put on my nightgown. As I lay in the dark, I heard the front door open and close, car doors shut, an engine started. They were leaving for the night. Of course they were. They had their own home to go to. This was just a project site for them now. The silence they left behind was deep and complete. It was not empty. It was full of my history. It was full of my husband's foresight. It was waiting for me. I closed my eyes. I did not think of the boxes in the living room. I thought of the law books in Marcus Thorne's office. I thought of the weight of a good lock. I thought of the specific language one uses to revoke a power of attorney. I composed the first sentence of the conversation in my mind. The words were clear and direct. They were the words of a woman who was done being discussed. They were the beginning. The first light of dawn was a pale line under my curtains. I had slept little, but I did not feel tired. I felt focused. The house was silent, still holding its breath from the previous day's violation. I rose, dressed in my gardening clothes, and went downstairs. The boxes were a dark cluster in the living room. I did not look at them directly. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. While it heated, I took my address book from the kitchen drawer. The page for tea was well worn. I found the number for Marcus Thorne's private line, the one Robert had written down for emergencies. It was 6:15 a.m. Marcus was an early riser. I took the cordless phone from its cradle and walked to the back porch. The morning air was cool. I could see the dew on the rose leaves. I dialed the number. It rang twice. Thorne. His voice was exactly as I remembered. Deep, clipped, no nonsense. Marcus, it's Eleanor Vance. There was the briefest pause. Ellie, it's been too long. Is everything all right? His tone shifted from business to personal concern. He knew a call at this hour on this line was not social. No, Marcus, it is not. Robert's firewall is being tested. I used his own term. It would convey everything. I heard the creak of a chair, the sound of a door closing. Understood. Tell me. My son David and his wife Chloe are here. They have packed my belongings into boxes. They have signed me into the Cedar Ridge Assisted Living Facility. David used his power of attorney. They intend to sell this house. They presented this to me as a final decision yesterday afternoon. I kept my report factual. My voice did not shake. Have you been moved? No. I am in my home. They left for the night. Good. the documents you have, the trust agreement, the concurrent powers of attorney. They are in front of me. Read me the clause in the trust agreement, Section 4, Paragraph A, regarding beneficiary occupancy rights. I opened the folder on the porch table. My fingers found the paragraph. It says, the lifetime beneficiary, Eleanor Marie Vance, shall have the exclusive and irrevocable right to occupy, use, and possess the trust property known as 2147 Maple Lane for the duration of her natural life. This right is not contingent upon mental or physical capacity and cannot be revoked, amended, or terminated by any successor trustee or beneficiary. Exactly, Marcus said. I could almost hear his mind working, assembling the legal framework. Now, the power of attorney you granted to David. You have the right to revoke it at any time, for any reason, as long as you are of sound mind. A doctor confirmed your mental acuity yesterday, correct? He did. Then we proceed. Listen carefully, Ellie. I will handle 3 things immediately. First, I will draft and file a revocation of the durable power of attorney granted to David Vance. I will have a courier bring it to you for signature by noon. Second, I will contact Cedar Ridge. As the trustee of your late husband's estate and the holder of your concurrent power of attorney, I will inform them that any agreement with David Vance is void, executed under undue influence, and that I am initiating legal proceedings for elder financial exploitation that will freeze their placement. Third, I will contact the bank and the investment firm. All accounts linked to the trust will be placed under administrative hold pending review. David and his wife will find their access suspended. I absorbed each point. It was a swift, surgical plan. They will be angry. Let them be angry. They are not in your home now? No. Do not let them back in. If they arrive, do not open the door. Tell them through the door that all communication must go through my office. Do you understand? Do not engage. They have shown their hand. This is no longer a family discussion. It is a legal matter. I understand. Ellie. His voice softened just a fraction. Robert made me promise. He said, if the time comes, you be the bad guy so she doesn't have to. I am the bad guy now. You just have to hold the line. Thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me yet. This will get unpleasant. They will panic when the money stops. They will say terrible things. You must be ready. I am ready. I looked at my garden, at the house behind me. This is my home. Then we begin. The courier will be there by noon with the revocation papers. Sign them. I'll call you this afternoon. Stay inside. We ended the call. I held the phone in my hand for a moment. The weight that had been crushing my chest since I saw the boxes began to lift. It was replaced by a different weight, the weight of execution. This was not a wish or a hope. It was a process now, set in motion. I went inside and made my tea. I drank it at the kitchen table. The legal document spread before me. I read every word of the trust again. My right to occupy was irrevocable. My position was legally unassailable. David and Chloe had not done their homework. They had seen an old woman in a house. They had not seen the architecture Robert had built around us. At 8 o'clock, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I did not move from the table. A key turned in the front door lock. The door opened. Chloe's voice called out, "Ellie, we brought breakfast." I remained seated. They walked into the kitchen. Chloe carried a paper bag from a bakery. David held a cardboard tray with 2 coffee cups. They stopped when they saw me sitting there with the documents. "What's all this?" Chloe asked, her cheerful tone false. "These are the terms of my husband's trust," I said. "You should have reviewed them before you started packing." David's face went pale. He set the coffees down. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I have revoked your power of attorney, David. As of this morning, you have no legal authority to make decisions for me or to access any of my accounts, or the trust accounts." Chloe laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You can't just revoke it. He's your son." "I can, and I have. My attorney, Marcus Thorne, is filing the paperwork as we speak. All communications regarding my person or my assets are to go through his office. I took a sip of my tea. Your attorney? David looked bewildered. Since when do you have an attorney? Since your father died, I said. He is the trustee of our estate. You remember Marcus. David's eyes widened. He did remember. He remembered a large, imposing man who spoke in paragraphs and commanded every room. Why would you do this? He whispered. Because you tried to evict me, I said, my voice finally allowing a sliver of the coldness I felt to show. Now I must ask you to leave. You are no longer welcome here without an appointment. Chloe dropped the bakery bag on the counter. This is ridiculous. David, say something. But David was just staring at me, the reality dawning in his eyes. He saw the papers. He saw my expression. He saw the end of his plan. He turned and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the front door open and close. Chloe glared at me. You selfish old woman. You'd rather live here alone than see your son happy. My son's happiness does not require my disappearance, I said. Goodbye, Chloe. She stormed out after him. The door slammed. The house was mine again, quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I looked at the bakery bag on my counter. I picked it up and placed it in the trash. Then I cleared my teacup and washed it. The ordinary actions were a balm. The first call had been made. The wheels were turning. I felt no triumph yet, only a steady, grim certainty. The next move was theirs, but the board was mine. The silence after the door slam was complete. I looked at the trash can holding the bakery bag. I lifted the liner, knotted it, and carried it out to the large bin by the garage. The morning air was clean. I breathed it in. Then I went to the garden shed. My tools hung in their designated places. I took the watering can, the small hand trowel, and my kneeling pad. I filled the can from the outdoor tap. The water was cold on my fingers. I began with the rose bushes along the south fence. I watered each one at the base, avoiding the leaves. The soil darkened, drinking it in. I checked for aphids. I saw none. The buds were tight and green, weeks from blooming. I worked methodically. The weeding required focus. I distinguished between the chickweed and the young perennials. I pulled the invaders, roots and all, and dropped them into my bucket. The sun warmed my back. My hands grew dirty, the soil under my nails. It was real. It was mine. Around 10 o'clock, I heard a car slow in front of the house. It did not turn into the driveway. It idled for a minute, then drove away. I did not look up from the lavender bed I was trimming. I went inside only for a glass of water. The boxes in the living room were a monument to their assumption. I walked past them as if they were furniture. I made a simple lunch: tomato soup, a slice of bread. I ate at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper. The world continued, full of its own problems. In the early afternoon, the doorbell rang. I looked through the side light. It was David, alone. He held a manila envelope. His shoulders were slumped. I did not open the door. I stood where he could see me through the glass. "Mom, please," he said, his voice muffled. "Have you spoken to Marcus Thorne?" I asked, my voice clear through the door. "No, not yet. I brought this. It's from Cedar Ridge, a cancellation form. I thought if I signed it, if we called it off—" "That is not the point, David. The point is that you initiated it. Signing a cancellation does not erase the action. It only acknowledges the retreat." I remained still. "You should speak to Marcus. He has all the information." "I don't want to speak to a lawyer. I want to speak to my mother." "You forfeited that privilege when you became my legal administrator instead of my son." The words were harsh, but I said them without malice. They were facts. "Go home, David. Talk to your wife. Assess your situation. Then, if you have anything to say to me, you may call. I will decide if I answer." His face contorted. "You're shutting me out." "You shut me in," I said. "You packed my things. You plotted my removal. Do not confuse consequence with punishment. You are experiencing the former." He stared at me, the envelope dangling from his hand. He looked lost. A part of me ached to open the door, to offer comfort. But that part had been packed away yesterday along with the photo albums. I turned and walked back to the kitchen. I heard him leave. The house was quiet again. I finished my soup. I washed the bowl and spoon. I dried them and put them away. The phone rang an hour later. The caller ID showed David and Chloe's number. I let it ring. It went to the machine. I heard Chloe's voice, tight and angry. "Ellie, pick up. We need to talk about this. This is childish." The beep cut her off. I erased the message. The courier arrived just after noon, as Marcus had promised. A young man in a uniform handed me a large envelope. "For Eleanor Vance. Need a signature." I signed the electronic pad. I took the envelope inside. The documents were dense with legal language. The first was the revocation of durable power of attorney. It listed David's full name and the date of the original document. There were lines for my signature, a notary's seal, and 2 witness signatures. Instructions indicated a notary public would arrive at my home at 4 p.m. The second document was a formal notice to David Vance, advising him of the revocation and instructing him to cease all actions under the authority. The third was a letter from Marcus on his firm's letterhead, summarizing the actions he had taken with Cedar Ridge and the financial institutions. At the bottom, he had handwritten, "Hold fast, M." I read every word. I placed the documents on the table, ready for the notary. For the rest of the afternoon, I returned to the garden. I repotted some geraniums. I swept the patio. The physical work was a counterweight to the legal machinery now grinding forward. My mind was clear. I thought of nothing but the task in front of my hands. At 4 o'clock, a woman arrived in a small sedan. She was the notary. I invited her into the kitchen. She checked my driver's license. I signed the revocation form where she indicated. She stamped it. Her witness signed. It took less than 5 minutes. She gave me my copy. "You're all set," she said with a polite, professional smile. "Thank you," I said. I saw her out. The document was now executed. David's authority was officially nullified. I filed my copy with the other papers in the folder. The process was no longer just in motion. It had produced its first concrete artifact, a piece of paper that severed a legal tie between mother and son. As dusk settled, I watered the garden again. The air grew cool. I saw a light go on in the house across the street. A normal evening. I locked the back door. I checked the front door. I drew the curtains in the living room, blocking the view of the boxes. I made a light dinner. I watched the news. The routine was a fortress. Every ordinary action I performed was a stone added to its walls. Chloe's words on the answering machine called it childish. She mistook discipline for petulance. She did not understand that my normalcy was now a weapon. My calm was a provocation. I went to bed early. The house was silent, but it was a different silence from the night before. It was not a shocked silence. It was a waiting silence. It was the silence of a field after the first volley has been fired, before the advance begins. I slept. The sound of a vehicle pulling into the driveway woke me just after 5. The digital clock cast a pale green glow. I had been expecting this. I rose, put on my robe, and went to the front window. A white van with a magnetic sign that read 24/7 locks and security was parked behind David's car, which was still in the driveway from his brief visit the day before. A man in a uniform got out carrying a large toolbox. I met him at the front door. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm here for the rekey job. Mr. Thorne's office scheduled it. Standard procedure on all exterior entry points." "Proceed," I said. I stepped back. He set to work on the front door first. The rasp of tools, the clatter of old pins into a tray, the solid thunk of the new deadbolt engaging. It was a swift, professional process. I watched from the kitchen, making a pot of coffee. The smell of it filled the air, familiar and grounding. The locksmith moved to the back door, then the door from the garage into the laundry room. He worked with efficiency. In less than 45 minutes, he was done. He came to the kitchen doorway. "All set, ma'am. 3 new deadbolts, all keyed alike." He placed 6 shiny silver keys on the table. "These are for you. The old keys are obsolete." He gathered his tools. "Have a good day." "Thank you," I said. I did not offer him coffee. This was a business transaction. I heard his van leave. The house was quiet again, but now it was sealed. I picked up one of the new keys. It was cool and heavy in my hand. I put 2 keys on my key ring. I placed the others in the drawer where I kept spare batteries and light bulbs. The sun was fully up now. I poured a cup of coffee and took it to the kitchen table. I sat where I could see the front driveway and the street. I waited. At 7:30, a courier on a motorcycle arrived. He handed me a thick envelope. "For Eleanor Vance, personal delivery." I signed. The envelope was from Marcus Thorne's firm. Inside were 2 items: a formal letter confirming the change of locks as a security measure following the revocation of power of attorney, and a small sealed note card. I opened the card. In Marcus's handwriting, it read, "The first wall is up. They will test it soon. Do not open the door. Call me if they attempt entry. M." I placed the letter with my other documents. I finished my coffee. I washed the cup. At 8:15, David's car, followed by Chloe's, turned onto the street. They had come together. David parked behind where his other car still sat, blocked in by the now departed locksmith's van. Chloe pulled in behind him. They got out. David looked tired. Chloe's expression was set in lines of pure irritation. She was dressed for work, in a sleek dress and heels. They walked to the front door. I saw David reach for his keychain. He inserted the key. It would not turn. He jiggled it. He pulled it out, looked at it, and tried again. He could not get it to engage. Chloe pushed past him and tried her key. It also failed. She knocked sharply on the door. "Ellie, the door is stuck." I stood up from the table and walked to the foyer. I stood on my side of the door. "It is not stuck," I said, my voice calm through the wood. "The locks have been changed." There was a moment of silence. "What?" David's voice confused. "The locks have been changed," I repeated. "For my security. Your keys no longer work." "Mom, open the door," David said, his voice pleading. "I will not. You are not welcome here without an appointment. All communication is to go through Marcus Thorne." "This is insane," Chloe shouted. She rattled the doorknob. "Open this door right now. We have things to do. Our stuff is in there." "Your belongings are not here," I said. "My belongings are here, in boxes you packed. You may leave now." "We're not leaving," Chloe said. I heard her fist strike the door, a dull thud. "David, do something." "Mom, please," David said. "Just let us in to talk. We can fix this." "You cannot fix it. You can only deal with the consequences. Your first consequence is that you are locked out. Your second is that your access to the trust accounts has been suspended. I suggest you go home and contact Marcus. He can explain the rest." I turned and walked back to the kitchen. I heard their voices arguing with each other now, muffled and frantic. I heard Chloe say, "Call a locksmith." I heard David reply, "She just had one come. It's legal." Their panic was a distant noise. I poured myself more coffee. I stood at the sink, looking out at the back garden, my back to the front of the house. The pounding stopped. I heard their footsteps on the porch, then on the gravel of the driveway. Car doors slammed. 2 engines started. One car reversed quickly down the driveway. The other, David's blocked car, remained. I finished my coffee. I went to the living room. The boxes were still there. I looked at them. Then I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain an inch. David's car sat alone in the driveway. They had left in Chloe's car. They would be back, but for now, they were gone. I felt a quiet, solid satisfaction. It was not joy. It was the confirmation of a correct calculation. The first tangible countermove had been executed perfectly. They were on the outside. I was on the inside. The boundary was no longer just emotional or legal. It was physical. 3 new deadbolts stood between their intentions and my peace. I went to the hall closet and got the step stool. I reached to the top shelf and retrieved a small framed cross-stitch Robert's mother had made decades ago. It read, "A man's home is his castle." I had always thought it was a quaint, old-fashioned sentiment. Now I understood its practical truth. A castle needs walls. It needs a gate. It needs a ruler who is willing to defend it. I dusted the frame and placed it on the mantel where it had always sat before Chloe had likely packed it away. It was the first item I was unpacking, a small, deliberate act of reclamation. The rest of the boxes could wait. The lesson was still in progress. I returned to the kitchen. The morning was mine. I had gardening to do. The roses needed fertilizing. The ordinary work continued, but now within a newly secured perimeter. Every scrape of the trowel in the earth, every snip of the shears, was an affirmation. They had tried to make me a guest in my own life. Now they were the ones without a key. I spent the morning in the garden, but my attention was divided. I weeded the same patch 3 times. My focus was not on the plants, but on the house, on the street, on the predictable next act of this drama. David's car remained in the driveway, a silent, metallic symbol of their interrupted plan. They would need to come back for it. They would need to face the locked door again. Around 11, Chloe's car returned. It parked on the street this time. They both got out. David looked defeated. Chloe's face was a mask of controlled fury. She marched up to the front door and knocked, a hard, rapid staccato. I did not go to the door. I stood at the living room window, partially hidden by the curtain, and watched. "Ellie, we know you're in there," Chloe shouted. "We need to get David's car, and we need to talk." David hung back, his hands in his pockets. He said something to her, too low for me to hear. She shook her head sharply. I remained still. They were not a threat. They were a nuisance. The new deadbolts ensured that. After a minute of no response, Chloe threw her hands up. "Fine, we'll do this the hard way." She pulled out her phone. I saw her dial, put the phone to her ear, and begin pacing on the porch. I could not hear the conversation, but her gestures were sharp and frustrated. She was trying to call a tow truck or a locksmith or perhaps Marcus. It did not matter. Any reputable service would check property records and ownership, and my name was the only one on the utility bills. The car was on private property. It was a logistical problem of their own making. Chloe ended the call and said something to David. His shoulders slumped further. They walked back to her car. As Chloe opened the driver's door, she paused and pulled out her wallet. She extracted a credit card. She held it for a moment, looking at it, then got in the car. They drove away. I knew then that the second phase had engaged. The financial freeze. Marcus had said he would contact the banks. He would have done it first thing this morning. Their joint accounts, the ones they used for daily expenses, would be flagged. The trust distributions David received quarterly would be halted. The credit cards linked to those accounts would be declined. I went to the kitchen and made lunch. I ate. I washed the dishes. The routine was my anchor. The phone rang in the early afternoon. The caller ID showed David's cell number. I let it go to the machine. His voice was strained, trying for calm. "Mom, it's David. We're having some issues with our bank cards. I think there might be a hold because of some fraud alert. I was wondering if you could call Marcus and ask him to clear it up, just temporarily, so we can get a hotel room or something. Please call me back." A hotel. So they had not gone home. Perhaps they had driven straight from my house to a hotel, only to be refused at the front desk. The humiliation of that moment in a public lobby would have been acute for Chloe. I felt no pleasure in it. I felt a grim acknowledgement of cause and effect. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time, it was a number I did not recognize. I picked up on the 4th ring out of habit. "Hello? Mrs. Vance?" It was a young woman's voice, officious and polite. "This is Lisa from Premier Bank Fraud Prevention. We're calling regarding a series of declined transactions on an account jointly held by David and Chloe Vance. They listed this number as a contact. We're trying to verify some information to— You have reached the wrong party, I interrupted, my voice flat. I have no connection to that account. Do not call this number again. I hung up. So they had given the bank my number. A final, petty attempt to drag me into their crisis. It would not work. The next call came just before dinner. It was Marcus. Ellie, status update. He never wasted words. The injunctions are filed. All accounts are frozen. I have been contacted by David's bank. I informed them of the ongoing investigation into elder financial exploitation and advised them that any attempts to access funds pending litigation could render them liable. They will not be helping him. They gave the bank my number, I said. I am not surprised. They are panicking. The car is still there? Yes. Leave it. It is not your problem. If they attempt to have it towed, the company will need to confirm ownership of the property. Refer them to me. How are you holding up? I am fine, I said. It was true. The house was quiet. The locks were solid. They called asking me to intervene for a hotel. Let them sleep in their car, Marcus said, with no sympathy in his voice. They made a choice to weaponize comfort and security against you. Now they can experience the absence of both. It is a necessary lesson. David sounded desperate. Good. Desperation leads to clarity. He will have to choose between his wife's agenda and his own conscience. My job is to make that choice unavoidable. Your job is to remain the immovable object. Are you still gardening? Yes. Excellent. Keep doing that. I will call tomorrow. He ended the call. I made a simple dinner. As I was eating, I saw headlights sweep across the front window. Chloe's car pulled up to the curb again. This time, only David got out. He walked slowly up to the front door. He did not knock. He just stood there for a long time, looking at the door, at the house. His face, illuminated by the porch light, was a portrait of misery. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against the wood. I watched him from the darkness of the living room. A part of me, the mother part, wanted to open the door, to ask him what he was thinking, to offer him a meal. But that part was locked away just as he was locked out. He had chosen his side when he packed the first box. Now he was feeling the cost of that choice. After several minutes, he straightened up. He turned and walked back to the car. He got in the passenger seat. The car sat there for a while, then slowly pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street. I finished my dinner. I cleaned the kitchen. I checked the locks on all 3 doors. The house was secure. Their financial world was collapsing. Their plan was in ashes. My hands were clean. I had not shouted. I had not pleaded. I had simply made a phone call and watered my roses. The mechanisms Robert and Marcus had built years ago were now doing their work. It was almost impersonal. I went to bed. The silence of the house was no longer waiting. It was settling. It was the silence of a storm that has passed, leaving behind clear, cold air and the certainty of changed landscape. The boxes in the living room were the last evidence of the old reality. Soon, they too would be gone. The morning after David pressed his forehead to my door, I woke, knowing they would return. Desperation has a predictable rhythm. They had spent a night without money, without a plan, without control. The only asset they could see was the house they had tried to take. They would come to try and reason with it one last time. I dressed carefully. I made breakfast. I organized the documents Marcus had sent into a clear sequence in a new folder. The trust agreement on top, then the revocation, then the bank notices, then the letter from Cedar Ridge confirming the cancellation of my admission due to legal irregularities. I placed the folder on the hall table. At 9 o'clock, I saw Chloe's car turn onto the street. It parked behind David's stranded car. They both got out. They looked disheveled. Chloe's hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. David hadn't shaved. They approached the porch with none of the previous day's aggressive energy. This was a defeated march. I waited until they were on the top step. Then I opened the front door. Not wide, just the width of my body. I held the folder in my hands. They stopped, startled by the door opening. Chloe's eyes flashed with a momentary hope that was quickly extinguished when she saw my expression. "Mom," David began, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for—" "I am not opening the door for you," I said, cutting him off. "I am providing you with information. You will take it, you will leave, and you will not return unless I invite you." I extended the folder through the narrow opening. "This explains your situation." Chloe reached for it, her fingers snatching it from my hand. She opened it immediately, her eyes scanning the top page. David leaned in to look. "What is this?" Chloe said, her voice a mix of confusion and disdain. "A trust?" "It is the Eleanor and Robert Vance Family Trust," I said, "established 15 years ago. The house at 2147 Maple Lane is its primary asset. I am the sole lifetime beneficiary. That gives me the exclusive, irrevocable right to live here until I die. The trust cannot be amended. It cannot be dissolved. Your plan to sell this house was never legally possible." David's face went slack. He took the folder from Chloe's trembling hands and turned a page. "Successor beneficiary," he read aloud, then looked up at me. "What does this mean?" "It means you are named to inherit what remains after my passing under specific conditions. The trust is administered by Marcus Thorne. All distributions, including any to you, require his approval as trustee. Your recent actions have been classified as attempted financial exploitation of an elder. As such, Marcus has suspended all distributions to you indefinitely. He has also frozen every account you have that is linked to the trust or to my assets. The credit card declines, the blocked accounts. That is not an error. It is a policy." Chloe found her voice. "You can't do that. That's David's inheritance." "It is not an inheritance until I am dead," I said, my tone flat. "It is a trust, and right now you are both considered adversarial parties to that trust. Your access is revoked." "This is your fault," Chloe shrieked, turning on David. "You said everything was simple. You said the house was just in her name." "I didn't know about a trust," David shouted back, his composure breaking. "Dad never said anything." "Your father told you to review the estate documents with your own lawyer when you turned 35, I said. "You did not do that. You assumed. That is not my error." David stared at me, the folder hanging from his hand. The reality was settling into his features, heavy and cold. "You set a trap for me." "I built a wall to protect myself," I corrected him. "You chose to run headlong into it. The trust was not a secret. It was a fact you chose to ignore because it was inconvenient to your wife's ambitions." Chloe stepped forward, her finger jabbing toward me. "You vindictive old bat! You're trying to ruin us." "No," I said, not moving an inch. "You tried to ruin me. You tried to package me and ship me to a facility and sell my home. I am simply demonstrating that you cannot. The only thing ruined is your plan. Your financial discomfort is a direct consequence. It will continue until Marcus is satisfied that the threat of exploitation has passed. That may take months. It may take years." David's eyes were wet. "Mom, please, we have nothing. Our cards are dead. We can't even get a room. We slept in the car last night." I looked at him. I felt the ache, deep and old, but I did not let it reach my voice. "That is unfortunate. You should have considered where you would sleep before you began packing my belongings. I suggest you contact a friend or a family member, perhaps Chloe's parents. This is no longer my concern." "You would let your son be homeless?" Chloe spat. "You made your son complicit in making his mother homeless," I said. "The symmetry is yours to contemplate. Now, you will leave my property. If you return, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing. All future communication must go through Marcus Thorne." I began to close the door. "Wait!" David cried out. He dropped the folder on the porch and held up his hands. Just tell me what to do. How do I fix this?" I paused. the door half closed. I looked at him, at the boyish panic in his eyes, now layered with a man's failure. "You cannot fix this," I said, indicating the space between us. "You can only address your own actions. You can start by admitting, fully, what you did and why it was wrong. Not to me, to yourself. Then you can contact Marcus and cooperate fully with his audit. You can disentangle yourself from the narrative that I am a burden to be managed. Until you do those things, there is nothing to discuss. Take your car. It is the last tangible thing you will get from me for a very long time." I closed the door. The solid click of the new deadbolt engaging was the final punctuation. I did not move from the foyer. I listened. I heard Chloe sobbing, angry, gulping sobs. I heard David say, "Just get in the car." I heard their footsteps retreat. Car doors opened and closed. An engine started. David's car finally freed. Then 2 engines faded down the street. I waited a full minute. Then I opened the door. The manila folder lay on the welcome mat. I bent down, my knees protesting, and picked it up. I brushed off a speck of gravel. I brought it inside and placed it back on the hall table. The confrontation was over. The truth had been delivered. They had looked into the face of their own miscalculation and seen the steel behind it. There was no more ambiguity. The war was not won. Wars like this are never truly won. But the battle for the house was over. I had held the high ground. I had revealed my defenses. They were broken and retreating. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. The familiar ritual. The house was so quiet. The boxes in the living room seemed smaller now, less threatening. They were just cardboard and tape. The important things, the deeds, the rights, the history, were all in my name. I had stated them clearly on my own porch. I had looked into my son's eyes and shown him the boundary he had crossed. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But as the kettle began to sing, I felt, for the first time since finding those boxes, a sense of peace. It was a cold peace, but it was mine. The cold peace of the morning after the porch confrontation was a fragile thing. I gardened, but my mind kept returning to David's face, the wetness in his eyes that wasn't quite tears, the way his shoulders had collapsed under the weight of the folder. I had shown him the wall. Now I had to live with the fact that he was on the other side of it. Late in the afternoon, I saw a figure walking up the street. It was David, alone, on foot. He was still wearing the same clothes from the day before. He did not turn up the driveway. He walked to the gate of the back garden, which was never locked, and hesitated. He saw me kneeling by the herb bed. I did not stand. I did not invite him in. I continued pinching back the basil, waiting. He opened the gate and walked slowly down the path. He stopped a few feet from me, standing awkwardly among the rosemary and lavender. "Can I sit?" he asked, his voice rough. I nodded to the stone bench under the willow tree. He went and sat on its edge, his elbows on his knees, his head down. I finished with the basil, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked over. I sat on the other end of the bench, leaving a clear space between us. The air smelled of earth and greenery. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds were birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower. "Chloe left," he finally said, not looking at me. "She packed a suitcase this morning. She said I was weak, that I'd ruined everything. She took her car and said she's staying with her sister. She said she's contacting a lawyer." I said nothing. I had expected this. Chloe's affection was conditional on success. Failure was a defect she would not tolerate. "I've been walking," he said. "I don't have anywhere to go. I called in sick to work. I can't think." He finally lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "I am so sorry, Mom." The words hung in the air. I waited. "I'm not sorry about the money or the house," he continued, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I'm sorry for letting her pack your things, for not stopping it, for standing there, for thinking, even for a second, that it was easier to just go along with it. I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't wanted in your own home. I'm sorry for being a coward." He was crying now, silent tears tracking through the stubble on his cheeks. He made no move to wipe them away. "Why did you do it, David?" I asked. My voice was quiet. "Not the legal reasons, the real reason." He took a shuddering breath. "Because she never stopped. The plans, the comments, the hints. The house is too big. The neighborhood is changing. Think of the equity." It was a constant pressure. And I just wanted the pressure to stop. I thought if we did this one thing, if we took care of it, then she would be happy, and things would be calm. I chose her peace over your dignity. It was the worst thing I've ever done. There it was, the unvarnished truth. Not greed, not malice, but a profound, selfish weakness. The desire for a quiet life at the expense of someone else's. "You did not just choose her peace," I said. "You chose the path of least resistance. You saw me as the obstacle to that path. That is what hurts." "I know," he whispered. "I don't know how to fix it. I know I can't fix it with you. But I have to start somewhere. The first step is to release any expectation of fixing it with me," I said. "This is not a problem to be solved. It is a breach that happened. It will always have happened. We can only build something new over the top of it if we choose to, and I have not yet chosen." He nodded, accepting the severity of that. "What would it take? For you to even consider it?" I looked out at my garden, at the work of decades. It would take time, a great deal of time. It would take you demonstrating through consistent action that you understand what you did. That would require you to be in counseling, to understand why your need for approval from her outweighed your duty to me. It would require you to build a life independently, financially and emotionally, from Chloe. It would require you to respect every boundary I set without question or negotiation. You would have to earn back the privilege of a conversation, then the privilege of a visit, then perhaps, one day, the privilege of trust. It would be a long road, and I may never reach the end of it. He was silent, absorbing the scale of the task. "That's fair," he said finally. "It's more than fair." "It is not about fairness," I said. "It is about integrity. You showed me you lack it. You must now prove you can build it, starting with yourself." "I'll do it," he said. The words were simple, but there was a resolve in them that had been absent before. It was not the resolve to get something back. It was the resolve to face himself. "I'll find a therapist. I'll find a place to stay. I'll get my finances in order. I won't contact you until you tell me I can." "That is correct," I said. He stood up. He looked older, but also clearer, as if the storm had scoured him clean. "Thank you for talking to me." "I did not do it for you," I said, remaining seated. "I did it for me. To say what needed to be said. Now you should go." He nodded. He turned and walked back up the garden path. He opened the gate, stepped through, and closed it softly behind him. I did not watch him walk away. I looked at the space on the bench where he had been sitting. The ache in my chest was profound. It was the ache of a necessary amputation. The son I thought I had, the one who would protect me, was gone. The man who was left was flawed and broken. There was a chance, a slight one, that he could rebuild himself into someone better. But that was his work now, not mine. I sat on the bench until the evening chill began to seep into the stone. I felt a single tear escape, tracing a cool line down my cheek. I did not wipe it away. I let it fall onto the lap of my gardening apron, a small, dark spot on the faded denim. Then I stood, collected my tools, and went inside. The house welcomed me with its familiar shadows and smells. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The damp spot on my apron from my single tear dried as I put my tools away in the shed. I went inside, washed my hands, and changed my clothes. Then I stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at the boxes. They were no longer symbols of my defeat. They were just a task to be completed. I did not call David to help. I did not want his hands on my things again. Instead, I called Rosalind. She was from my church, a widow like me, and we had been friends for 20 years. She answered on the second ring. "Rosalind, it's Ellie. I have a need for some assistance and some company." Her response was immediate. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Do I bring food?" "Just yourself." True to her word, she arrived with a container of peach cobbler. She took one look at the boxes in the living room and then at my face. She did not ask questions. She set the cobbler on the kitchen counter, took off her cardigan, and rolled up her sleeves. "Where do we start?" "With the books," I said. "They should not be packed flat." We began. I sliced the tape on the first box with a utility knife. The smell of old paper and dust rose into the air. Inside, my books were layered with packing paper. I lifted them out one by one, checking the spines for damage. Rosalind took them and began wiping them with a soft cloth before passing them to me to place back on the shelves. We worked in a comfortable rhythm. "David came by today," I said after a while, my voice neutral. Rosalind did not pause in her wiping. And we talked in the garden. Chloe has left him. He apologized, not for the legalities, for the betrayal. "Good," Rosalind said. It was not a judgment on David. It was an acknowledgement that an apology was the bare minimum required. "What did you say?" "I told him the terms, counseling, independence, time, that I may never trust him again." She nodded. "Sounds right. Robert would have been harder on him." "Robert would have seen it coming," I said, placing a volume of Keats back in its spot. "He built the walls. I just had to remember they were there." We opened another box. This one held photo albums and smaller framed pictures. I unwrapped a silver frame holding a picture of Robert and me on our 20th anniversary. We were standing in this very garden, younger, our arms around each other. I dusted the glass with my sleeve. "He loved this house," Rosalind said, looking at the picture. "He used to say it was the third child you never had." "He put more work into its foundations than into some human relationships," I said. It was not a criticism. It was a fact. His foresight was the reason I still had a foundation to stand on. We continued unpacking. Each item we removed from the cardboard was a reversal of Chloe's act. A ceramic vase from my mother went back to the mantel. The linen table runners were refolded and placed in the sideboard. The wedding china was carefully unwrapped and returned to the glass-fronted cabinet. The house began to look like itself again. Rosalind told me news from the church about the upcoming bake sale, about whose grandchildren were visiting, the normal, gentle gossip of a community. It was a background hum of life continuing. When we got to the box with my more personal items, letters, old diaries, Robert's reading glasses still in their case, Rosalind discreetly moved to the kitchen to make us tea. She understood some things did not require an audience. I sat on the floor and sorted through the small pile. I did not read the letters. I simply placed them in the wooden chest where they belonged. I put Robert's glasses in the top drawer of his desk, where they had always been. These were not just objects. They were anchors. Rosalind returned with 2 cups of tea. She sat on the sofa and I joined her. The room was almost restored. Only one box remained, half full of miscellaneous kitchen items. "She underestimated you," Rosalind said, sipping her tea. "She underestimated Robert," I corrected. "And she underestimated the fact that a woman who has managed a home, a family, and a budget for 40 years understands asset protection. She thought old meant obsolete. It was a critical error." "Are you going to be all right here alone?" Rosalind asked. It was a practical question. "I have always been alone in the ways that matter," I said. "Robert has been gone for 8 years. David has been absent in spirit for longer than that. This is just a more honest version of alone. And I have the doors locked." Rosalind smiled. "Good for you, Ellie. Truly." She stayed until the last box was broken down and carried out to the recycling bin. We flattened the cardboard and stacked it neatly. The living room was whole. Every book, every picture, Every knick-knack was in its precise place. The air no longer smelled of cardboard and dust. It smelled of lemon polish and old paper, the scent of my home. I walked Rosalind to the door. "Thank you," I said. "Any time," she replied. She gave my arm a quick, firm squeeze, then left. I closed the door. I engaged the deadbolt. The sound was solid, final. I walked through the downstairs rooms, turning on lamps. The light fell on familiar surfaces, on restored order. The violation had been erased, physically at least. The emotional scar remained, but it was my scar. I would decide how it shaped me. I went to the kitchen and served myself a small portion of Rosalind's peach cobbler. I ate it at the table, looking out at the dark garden. I could not see the stone bench. That was fine. Some conversations were meant to be absorbed in darkness. The unpacking was done. The reclamation was complete. The house was mine again, in every sense. The next step was simply to live in it. The peach cobbler was finished the next day. The containers were washed and returned to Rosalind. The flattened cardboard boxes were collected by the recycling truck on its regular schedule. The house settled back into its rhythms, but the rhythms were now mine alone, and I adjusted to their new sound. Weeks passed. The legal machinery, once engaged, proceeded without my daily involvement. Marcus called with updates. The injunction against David and Chloe was made permanent. The financial freeze would remain in effect for a minimum of 1 year, after which Marcus would review David's compliance and progress. Chloe had indeed filed for divorce. The proceedings were swift, as they had no shared assets that weren't frozen or contested. She got nothing from the trust, of course. She got her car and her personal belongings. I did not inquire after her. She became a fact I no longer needed to consider. David, as he had promised, found a therapist. He found a small apartment sublet, paid for with his salary from work, which was his alone. He did not contact me. I heard about his progress in brief, formal emails from Marcus, who was in touch with David's lawyer. David was cooperating fully. He was attending his sessions. He had not attempted to contest the trust or the freeze. This was the bare minimum, but it was consistent. After 2 months, I sent David a single email. It contained no greeting. It read, "The garden needs weeding. This Saturday, 9 a.m. Bring work gloves. You will leave at noon." He replied within an hour. "I will be there." That Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen when I saw him walk up the street. He carried a pair of leather gardening gloves. He went to the garden gate and waited. I finished my coffee, then went out to meet him. "Good morning," he said. His voice was careful. I nodded. "The weeds are in the north bed, around the peonies. Pull them by the root, place them in the green bin." He put on his gloves and set to work. I took my shears and began deadheading the spent blooms from the azaleas on the opposite side of the garden. We worked in silence for an hour. The only sounds were the pull of roots from soil, the snip of my shears, the distant call of a bird. He worked diligently. He did not rush. He did not try to make conversation. He simply did the job I had set for him. At 11, I went inside and brought out 2 glasses of water. I set one on the stone bench near him. I took mine to the patio chair. "Thank you," he said, stopping to drink. I acknowledged this with another nod. When noon came, he gathered the last of the weeds into the bin, brushed the soil from his knees, and removed his gloves. "Is there anything else?" he asked. "Not today," I said. "Next Saturday. The hedges need trimming." "I'll be here," he said. He let himself out the garden gate and walked away. This became our new routine. Every Saturday morning he arrived at 9. I gave him a specific task. He completed it without commentary. He left at noon. We exchanged perhaps a dozen necessary words each visit. It was not a reconciliation. It was an apprenticeship in respect. He was learning the contours of a boundary, and I was learning to tolerate his presence within very strict limits. One Saturday in early summer, the task was to help me repot a heavy lemon tree. As we positioned the new ceramic pot, he spoke without looking at me. "My therapist says I need to understand that my apology can't be for getting caught. It has to be for the act itself. I'm working on that." I secured the plant with fresh soil. "That is the work," I said. Another time he said, "I told her about the trust, about how Dad set it up. She said it was an act of love, a profound one. I never saw it that way." "Your father understood that love requires practical safeguards," I replied. "Sentiment is not a defense." He absorbed that and we continued working. The weeks turned into months. The legal matters finalized. The house was unequivocally mine. My days were my own. I read, I gardened, I had tea with Rosalind, I attended my book club. The shadow that had fallen across my foyer that terrible afternoon had lifted, burned away by the harsh, clear light of consequence. On a bright Saturday morning in late summer, I was sitting on the porch with my tea. David was raking the gravel path in the garden. I watched him. His movements were less haunted, more purposeful. He was thinner. He looked his age. He finished the path and leaned the rake against the shed. He walked over to the porch but did not come up the steps. He looked at the climbing rose by the porch column. A single perfect yellow bud was just beginning to unfurl. "It's going to be a beautiful one," he said. "Yes," I agreed. He stood there for a moment, his hands in his pockets. Then he said, "My time is up. I'll see you next week." He turned to go. "David," I said. He stopped. "There is lemonade in the refrigerator. You may have a glass before you go. Use the kitchen door." He stood very still. This was a new permission. A glass of lemonade was not a weed to be pulled. It was a small, deliberate opening of an inner door. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. He went in through the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open, the clink of a glass. He did not linger. He came back out, finished his drink, and placed the empty glass in the sink. He reappeared on the porch steps. "It was good, thank you." I nodded. He left. I sat for a long time watching the new rosebud. The sun warmed my face. The tea cooled in my cup. The house stood solid and quiet behind me. Every lock was mine. Every memory was in its place. The vengeance was complete. Not a fiery destruction, but a cold, precise restoration of order. The son who had betrayed me was now a man who came on Saturdays to rake my paths, earning nothing, learning everything. I took a sip of my tea. It was just the right temperature. The rosebud held the promise of a full bloom tomorrow. I was here. I was home. I was, finally, at peace.